Big time fight coming up at lightweight in our co-main event, UFC 256. We have El Cucuy making his return. Unsuccessful interim title bid back this past spring against Justin Gaethje, looking to take on one of the most dangerous dual threats, really, that we have in the UFC in Charles do Bronx Oliveira. Matt, we talk about Charles Oliveira. He holds the UFC's submission record. And you look at the tidy little win streak that he's got going on since the tail end of 2017 when he lost to Paul Felder. He has wins over Clay Guida by first round guillotine, Christos Iago second round rear naked. He's got a win over Jim Miller first round rear naked choke, David Tamor Anaconda, Nick Lentz, Jared Gordon, and Kevin Lee at the start of this year. Now he's had a couple of different fights fall through, namely the Beneil Dariush fight back just a couple of months ago. But he's taken this fight against Tony Ferguson, and this is arguably the biggest fight of Charles Oliveira's career. And I know he's fought Max Holloway, he's fought Anthony Pettis and Lamas and Felder, but this is a huge fight. And Frank Yeager and Cub Swanson and Cowboy Cerrone, he really has fought a who's who since he came into the UFC. And if you're not aware, Charles Oliveira has been in the UFC since 2010. His debut, a first-round armbar over Darren Elkins. Those guys have really been around for a really long time. And Matt, I can't underscore Tony Ferguson's win-loss record. The fact that he went on an unbeaten streak for about 8 years, lost to Michael Johnson, and then just went on a crazy run, ended it this past spring against Justin Gaethje. There's almost nothing that this guy can't do. And it's crazy the amount of damage that he took in that fight against Justin Gaethje, but he just kept coming. I mean, he was like, I don't know, the Terminator.
He's almost like he's El Cucuy, his nickname.
Oh, boy.
He is the Mexican boogeyman, pretty much. And you look at what Tony Ferguson does well, it's everything. He doesn't have a massive weakness to his game. Is he hittable? Yes, he is. But here's the good news. Charles Oliveira is one of the few top lightweights who isn't going to really make him pay for that. And I don't mean that to really insult the striking of Charles Oliveira. He's become so much better of a striker than what he used to be. But power isn't the key to his game. He really likes to set up his shots. He relies more on the accuracy of his punches than he does the force behind them. So I do think Tony Ferguson, in that respect, this is a good stylistic matchup for him. On the reverse, this might be the first time Tony Ferguson's ever fought a guy who has better jiu-jitsu than himself. And I'm curious to see how he deals with that, because Anthony Pettis, for instance, is a great grappler. But the second that they were on the mat, Tony Ferguson started threatening with a leg lock immediately, and then he was throwing elbows off his back. That's good against a guy like Anthony Pettis. You can get away with that. With Charles Oliveira, the only real weakness he has in his grappling is sometimes he leaves his head out when he goes for takedowns. Anthony Pettis is able to take advantage of that. Ricardo Lamas is able to take advantage of that. And it is weird, too, that we talk about Charles Oliveira. He has the most submissions in UFC history. He's arguably the number one jiu-jitsu practitioner in the sport right now, or at least he uses it in his game the most. He's been submitted a few times himself. Now, I don't think Tony Ferguson is going to submit Charles Oliveira. That is my most unlikely outcome for this fight. But just something to consider, that when you're dealing with two guys who are very grappling heavy, I do think both guys could submit each other. And again, I don't really see it happening because I do think both guys' defense are at a great level. It's just really interesting that we're dealing with two grapplers at such a high level, but they can also do everything else.
Yeah, and I mean, for Charles Oliveira, maybe that name recognition isn't totally there. I mean, he got the win back over Jim Miller in that win streak. Not really close to the same level fighter Tony Ferguson took on, except for one being the common opponent of Kevin Lee, future champ, and I mean, great head tattoo too.
It's not looking great, you saying future champ right now.
This fight here, Matt, is so interesting because we can talk about the striking. The fact that I would argue Tony Ferguson, better striker, more dynamic striker. He's the type of guy that he's going to go and try and sweep the leg in a real fight. You never see that very often unless you're the Karate Kid. And you look at the Imanari rolls, you look at the crazy ways that he goes for takedowns. He just does, like, he doesn't do rolling thunder, but he'll just do some flips in the cage. He'll do some barrel rolls. He'll just have fun in there. And for Charles Oliveira, a little bit more technical with the way that he goes to take guys down. A little bit more technical with some of that jiu-jitsu. And a guy that still practices in a lot of tournaments as well for his jiu-jitsu.
Oh, yeah, and that is something you do have to bring up. Because, again, I feel like this has been a focal point, or at least a talking point, ever since the Thiago Santos Glover Teixeira fight. And to our credit, we were on this before a lot of people. There's levels to black belts. A lot of people in the UFC have black belts, but not everyone is Charles Oliveira. And Charles Oliveira, the fact that he does still actively compete in jiu-jitsu inside and outside of the gi, I think that is really important, because at that point, you're not just fighting good MMA grapplers, you're going against those people in their own discipline. And the fact that Charles Oliveira is still having success in straight jiu-jitsu just tells you at what level it must be for MMA fighters who, let's be honest, the average MMA lightweight probably would not be able to enter a lot of those tournaments that Charles Oliveira himself can win. This fight is very odd because Charles Oliveira does a few things that Tony Ferguson doesn't react to well, and it's the same vice versa. Tony Ferguson applies a ton of pressure. That's the first thing you have to bring up when you talk about Tony Ferguson. Whether he's getting hit, whether he's the one inflicting the damage, it is just in one direction. He's going to be moving forward. Oliveira doesn't react to pressure all that well. Now, he does have a few different attacks and a few different strikes that he likes to use to keep people off him. He's got that really nice kind of jumping push kick that he started using ever since the David Tamer fight. And Dan Hardy brought this up, so full credit to him, but it is true. The David Tamer fight, I really do feel like, was the first time that we saw Charles Oliveira as a possible elite fighter. Now, of course, he is elite at this point, but that was the first fight where, okay, like it was said, he was fighting the Clay Guidas, he was fighting the Jim Millers, guys were a little bit advanced in their age. I know David Tamer hasn't always won against the top level, but...
You better watch your underwears.
You better watch your underwears, because David Tamer is going to do something to him. Shout out to Cody Garbrandt for getting way too mad at that. But anyways, Charles Oliveira, I forget where I was now. I was just... Oh, David Tamer. David Tamer is a really good striker, and he's a really well-rounded MMA fighter. And the fact that Charles Oliveira was not only able to go out there and submit him, he beat him up on the feet so bad. He was throwing like Anderson Silva 12-6 elbows. He was throwing jumping front kicks. It was the first time that we had seen that major of an evolution in Oliveira's game, and he hasn't looked back since. He's been able to TKO guys. Now, of course, those guys being Nick the Carney Lentz and Jared Gordon, who I wouldn't consider elite, but it is a great sign that Oliveira is able to really start hurting guys on the feet. And even in the Kevin Lee fight, yes, Kevin Lee was having success when he took Oliveira down with his ground and pound, but Oliveira on the feet was landing front kicks to the body, really nice combinations over the top. And when Oliveira gets going, he reminds me of a fighter who you wouldn't think of.
Kevin Lee wasn't totally done in that fight.
He was, though. He got choked unconscious. Charles Oliveira, once he gets going, fights like Tim Means. He gets in this like weird rhythm where you can just tell he's confident with letting his hands go, and once he does hit that point, he lands every shot, it seems. His accuracy on the feet, something I don't think he gets enough credit for, but it's something that he's worked on a lot, and you can definitely tell in his fights.
I only have one criticism of you in that analysis. It's the fact that you're too young to use the traditional hourglass or the traditional clock, because it's 6 to 12 if it goes up like that.
Oh yeah, 12-6, my bad.
I'm just kidding. But overall, in this fight, you have Tony Ferguson that's been at the top of the heap for so long, former interim champ. He brings a baseball with him and bicycle gloves. He just does some weird stuff. And Charles Oliveira that's continued to work on his game to get himself to this point in such a marquee co-main event slot. And we have to say, this was supposed to be Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling. Either at the top or in the co-main, flip-flop, whatever you want to do. We're supposed to get a fight like that. This is either a close second or better than that. And I would argue it might even be a little bit better. I'm really looking forward to this fight. So, Matt, as far as the stats are concerned, both guys have positive striking differential. Charles Oliveira, a little bit better striking accuracy, a little bit less in terms of striking defense. In terms of the takedown average, Charles Oliveira going for more per 15 minutes at the same accuracy as Tony Ferguson, with slightly less as in terms of takedown defense. But I think that's a product of his game. He averages more 100%. Submissions per 15 minutes as well. It's been against the lesser competition. So if we have a look at the odds in this one, I have the printed odds. Tony Ferguson open to minus 130, he's now minus 173. For Charles Oliveira, open to plus 110, now at a plus 144. Over on Tapology, 893 total votes, 70% going Ferguson, 51% picking him to win by knockout. What do you make of all that?
So, again, I didn't even get to the Tony Ferguson side of what I was going to say. Charles Oliveira doesn't deal with pressure well. What does Tony Ferguson bring when he brings the pressure? Elbows. And those are going to cut Charles Oliveira a lot. Now, Oliveira... It's hard to say this because it's almost a judgment of character, but we've seen him sort of fade in fights when fights get tough. The Paul Felder fight's a great example. He was beating Paul Felder. He was completely out-grappling him. He was doing all those Charles Oliveira things that you expect. And then the second that Paul Felder started to have success, it just felt like Charles Oliveira could never get the reins back. Once the fight gets away from him, he does have a little bit of trouble kind of regaining momentum, and that concerns me against a guy like Tony Ferguson, who we know Tony Ferguson doesn't get tired throwing hundreds of strikes throughout a 5-round fight. Now you're making him fight for 10 minutes less. And the last time we saw Tony Ferguson in a 3-round fight was against Anthony Pettis, Cowboy, I guess, in one of the better fights that you're ever going to see, but also against Anthony Pettis. And I think those two fights are really important because we see an extra aggression to Tony Ferguson, and you're already dealing with one of the more aggressive fighters in all of MMA. So I think that this fight is somewhat tailor-made to Tony Ferguson. I was going back and forth a lot throughout the week. I can see where Charles Oliveira can have success, but when I really asked myself how this fight's going to go, I just see Tony Ferguson throwing a lot of volume up against the cage, and where Justin Gaethje had success was he can counter Tony with power. Oliveira has to counter Tony with almost finesse, and I think that's a very hard thing to do when you're fighting a guy like Cucuy.
So we talked about the Tapology votes. I pulled it up, and I'll have it up on screen as well. Over on the community tab on YouTube, we always post some neat stuff. You can find out the new podcasts that are coming out over on iTunes and Spotify. Maybe we have some t-shirts on sale, fightnightpicks.net. Check them out. Maybe there's some cool Manscaped products. But we threw the vote out there as well. 982 total votes, 71% going with Ferguson, 28% going with Charles Oliveira. It really is a tricky fight to try and break down. You have Tony Ferguson, again, top of the heap for so long, incredibly dynamic with his takedown attempts, with his submission abilities, with his ability on the feet. With Charles Oliveira kind of picking up steam in almost like a Tony Ferguson-esque way.
I agree.
Is it young Ferg? I don't know. In this fight, it's weird because I don't know how much damage Tony Ferguson took in that Justin Gaethje fight. So
a lot.
Well, exactly. And it was to the point where he's shaking his head, and you never want to see a guy in that type of situation. Like he had water in his ear. It was terrible. So for Tony Ferguson at 36 years of age, the guy's already a freak athlete as it is. Could I see him pulling out a win? 100% I could. Could I see Charles Oliveira winning this one as well? Yeah, I could. I mean, the odds are what they are. Ferguson almost a 2-1 favorite. I don't really like it where it's at. To me, this is a pass. I will edge Tony Ferguson ever so slightly because, again, I know exactly what he can do, and it hasn't been that long ago since he beat Cerrone, beat Pettis in absolutely grueling fashion to the point where doctor stoppage, corner stoppage, and again, Pettis was hanging in there in that fight, but he also didn't look very good in the face either. And you see those mashups of Tony Ferguson fights after the fact, you know exactly what the guy does. So I will ever so slightly edge Tony Ferguson. And again, we'll see how this one plays out during the week, but I'm really looking forward to it. Final pick?
Tony Ferguson. Again, this is your fight of the night, so it is going to be two-sided. It's not like I think Tony Ferguson's going to run over Charles Oliveira by any means. Just Oliveira, he can't counter Ferguson with the things that we've seen Ferguson struggle with. Ferguson does get hit clean. He does get dropped. But you have to ask yourself, who are the guys doing that? Well, Lando Venata, who definitely isn't on Charles Oliveira's level, but he definitely is a more explosive striker. And Anthony Pettis, who is one of the better strikers really in MMA history. So I think Oliveira can have success. I wouldn't be surprised if he won, but I'm fairly confident with my Ferguson pick.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We both have Tony Ferguson to get the win. And hey, you're going to want to stick around for our main event prediction. We have Deiveson Figueiredo taking on the assassin baby Brandon Moreno in the main event for flyweight gold. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it.